I'm very, very happy to be here. I retired in 2018, started teaching here in 1970, and altogether I spent 51 years torturing my students. And let me assure you, 98% of them deserved it. I consider myself an educator as much as a composer, as an artist. Generally refer myself to as musician. And, but education is a tough subject. And historically, you may know, may not know, much changed after World War II, where colleges began to blossom and education started opening up, which was the good part. But with it came the 60s, which I love personally, but there were also certain interesting habits. Jeff Cope stole one of my favorite stories that I wanted to tell, and I was ready to kick him, which is describe the obvious. And I think teaching is about that. It's about describing the obvious. And the way that happened, I'll fill in a few details, is Brother Edwards, whom to this day I consider one of the most influential persons that I've ever met. For our first assignment, he supposedly taught English. He didn't teach English. He used English to teach philosophy. The assignment was this: go home, pick a political cartoon, paste it on your piece of paper, and then describe the obvious. Well, we were on 15 years old at that time, and full of ourselves as only as 15-year-olds can be. So we all wrote, prolifically about all the meaning that these cartoons had. This was a politician, this was this, and this was dealing with this and this and this. And we handed it in thinking we're going to get patted on the shoulder. Instead, we got kicked in the butt. Why? He said, I asked you to describe the obvious. You gave me your interpretation. Do not think about giving interpretation until the obvious is clearly in your mind. And the obvious things are very banal. They're not particularly interesting. There's a man standing over a river, 1 foot on one side, 1 foot on the other. He's got a bald spot on his head. He's wearing glasses. He's got a piece of paper in his left hand, and in his right hand is in his pocket, blah, 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 blah. That is the obvious. Then you can talk about the interpretation. And the interpretation becomes very personal. Why is his hand in his pocket? What paper could he possibly be holding in his hand? It doesn't say. That was an eye-opener for me. And it helped me in my music because I would look upon music not what somebody told me was all about, but what the notes told me. And I think that is true about life. And it's also true about all arts. It isn't, when you're describing a painting or describing the obvious, you don't describe the feeling it gives you. That's your personal opinion. You describe how it's structured. And I think this is an important lesson for life as well, as you decide what you're going to do or not going to do. But in the 60s, I ran into another phenomenon. I had a student when I was teaching at CalArts, and he came in to me to study piano. And he was, your typical late 1960s, it was about 1968. Long hair, very, casual, sort of the beat generation, and the hipsters were taking over a bit. And he wanted to learn piano, which I also taught. And so He told me, how long will it take me to learn to do the piano? I said, well, it just depends what you want to do with it. If you want to learn how to play some simple tunes with chord changes and some easy pieces, preludes of this and that, yeah, you can do it in a year if you've spent about an hour to 2 hours a day very much working on that. And then, you know, if you want to get better, it'll take 2 years. But if you want to play even Mozart sonatas and easy Beethoven sonatas and, you know, Chopin nocturnes and then Debussy preludes and so on, it'll take 3 years. So he looked at me. You give, what, 1 lesson a week? I said, yeah. 3 years, you say? Yes. If I got 3 lessons a week, would I learn it in a year? Which told me something important, that the student no longer thought of himself as learning, but getting ahead as quickly, as painlessly as possible. It doesn't work like that. But we are, to some extent, living in that age. Educators have to deal with that. Students are now customers. A dear friend of mine is teaching one of the top 20 schools in the country. And we talked, and he said, Virko, you couldn't teach the way you do down here because you couldn't call your student names. I couldn't? Even when they are stupid? No, that's demeaning them. No, it's not demeaning them. It's accurately describing the obvious. So, and I said, well, what's the problem? Well, it's a private school. It costs the parents about $40,000 a year. You're not allowed to offend the $40,000 a year. Because that became the criteria of how the teacher treats the students. I don't believe in that. So I know very well that if I had entered this school, and it's a school that I love dearly in many ways, it's a school that allowed me all kinds of opportunities. And I was able to also do, I think, quite a bit for the school in many ways. But if I was teaching now and I would do some techniques that I use on students, I'd be fired. Because I would frighten them. I would make them feel unsafe. I never touched them, I never hit them, I never did anything. I just described the obvious. And I think we need to get back to describing the obvious. When we get students here in music, and I can't talk about other subjects, I'm not qualified. We often will get students who want to become musicians, and you ask them, can you write anything down? Have you done it? Not really, but I want to be one like that. So what do you play? I play guitar, and I can do 4 chord changes. Well, that's not exactly what we do. But we take them anyway, and then we hope that we can bring them up slowly. And I think that is something that has to be addressed in a way that I don't think has been addressed, not only here, but any place yet. So I hope that the future will remain to be bright for an institution that has some wonderful teachers, some wonderful people in here, and some wonderful students too. But if we accept students who do not come from the backgrounds that are necessary to have, then we need to provide that background for them, which may mean 5 years rather than 4, or even 6 years. Because our high schools and the other schools do not provide that. And I think we need to understand that and act upon that. This is sort of my love letter to the school right now. Meaning, as I said, I've taught here for 48 years and then stayed on for another 3, as I call it, as an appendage, doing some projects. There's so much this school has done and so much this school can do. But I think it needs to address the problem of the fact that our schools do not prepare students for college. That's all. There are very few that do. And I hope that these few describing the obvious will nurture some of you to begin to think in terms of how to make this school also friendly towards students who come here and don't know enough to be a contributing member. That to me is a very important subject. And also, it may make some of you very angry at me for saying this. That's okay, I'm used to that. That it's important to think about that. So, education, I think, is the primary difference that makes between a meaningful life and not. I really do. So I leave you with that, and I want to thank everybody. And of course, I could thank my family, all my teachers, and everybody else. That's all well understood. And I'm very happy to see my daughter here, and my 3 grandchildren, and my wife, and many friends that are here. But I want to leave you with a hopeful note at the end that requires work. So, the describing the obvious individual is now leaving. Thank you.